The night London remember her disgrace began beneath the ceiling of crystal light, where chandeliers blazed like constellations trapped indoors, and the air trembled with music, perfume, and expectation. Silk skirts brushed marble, gloves whispered against goblets, and every face turned instinctively toward power. She stood among them in pale satin, composed as marble, while across the room the Duke of Ashbourne paused, straight-backed and distant, already resolved. Society sensed the fracture before a word was spoken, for in such rooms instinct traveled faster than truth, and humiliation always arrived elegantly dressed, never alone, never quietly. He crossed the floor with measured steps, a man bred to command silence without asking for it. The musicians softened, conversation faltered, and the world narrowed to the space between them. She met his gaze without flinching, though her pulse betrayed her calm. They had been promised since youth, their futures discussed like estates and treaties, affection assumed unnecessary. When he spoke, his voice carried clarity without cruelty, a blade honed by etiquette. He regretted, he explained, the misunderstanding of expectation. Marriage required compatibility of rank, not sentiment. Love, he concluded, was an indulgence unsuited to duty. The words landed cleanly, precisely, leaving no wound that could be publicly acknowledged. A collective breath passed through the room, followed by the faintest rustle of judgment. She neither protested nor pleaded. Her hands remained folded, her chin lifted. She answered with a curtsy that honored both of them, thanking him for his honesty, though the phrase tasted like ash. Those nearest pretended interest in draperies and wine, yet every ear strained toward her measured composure. To falter would have confirmed society's quiet verdict. To endure, she understood, was her only remaining form of resistance. When she withdrew, the ballroom resumed its pulse, relieved, invigorated by scandal narrowly contained. In corridors and carriage rides, interpretations multiplied. Some praised the Duke's firmness, others pitied her misfortune. Few questioned the system that required such public sacrifices. Upstairs, she paused in an antechamber heavy with roses, breathing through the tightness behind her ribs. Years of instruction surfaced, never burden others with emotion, never display disappointment, never demand more than offered. She adjusted her gloves, erased the evening from her expression, and returned long enough to be seen departing with grace intact. Beyond the townhouse doors, night received her without ceremony. The city smelled of damp stone and extinguished lamps, familiar yet suddenly estranged. Her family urged retreat, and she accepted without argument. By morning, trunks were packed, letters unanswered, invitations declined. London, which had promised belonging through marriage, now offered only memory sharpened by repetition. She left before rumor could harden into identity, carrying with her a reputation preserved by silence. On the road north, fields replaced facades, and distance softened the noise, though it could not yet reach the ache. At Ashbourne House, the Duke returned to rooms that reflected his certainty. Portraits of ancestors watched with approval, their lives shaped by similar decisions, their legacies undiminished by tenderness. He believed himself untroubled. Duty, he reasoned, demanded sacrifice, and he had merely chosen correctly. Yet as days passed, the absence of her presence surfaced unexpectedly, like a missing note in familiar music. The household continued flawlessly, but something intangible faltered. He dismissed the thought as indulgence, reminding himself that clarity often felt uncomfortable before it felt right. Weeks unfolded into a quieter rhythm for her, structured by countryside light and modest routines. Without spectacle, she discovered the relief of being unseen. Walks replaced assemblies, conversation replaced performance. There, kindness arrived unannounced, not as promise, but as practice. A neighbor, attentive without insistence, offered companionship rooted in respect. She did not mistake courtesy for destiny, yet found herself breathing easier. The wound London left began to close, not erased, but no longer bleeding. She learned the texture of days unmeasured by rank, and the dignity of choosing calm over expectation. News traveled slowly, yet inevitably. A letter, careful in phrasing, mentioned her settled comfort, her restored spirits, the possibility of affection renewed elsewhere. The Duke read it twice, then again, unsettled by an emotion he struggled to name. Jealousy seemed too vulgar, regret too late. Still, the idea of her happiness beyond his influence disturbed the architecture of his reasoning. He walked his estate at dusk, listening to gravel beneath his boots, sensing the vastness around him for the first time as something other than triumph. That evening, he stood at a tall window overlooking grounds that had never failed to reassure him. Lamps glowed in distant villages, each marking lives he had never considered individually. Somewhere among them, she was learning to belong without him. The thought pressed upon his chest with unfamiliar weight. For the first time, certainty did not settle him. It unsettled him deeply, leaving him watching the darkening horizon, aware that a door he closed with precision might have been the only one leading inward. In the months that followed, her life settled into a gentler cadence, measured not by invitations, but by light and weather. Morning arrived through lace curtains, softening the room rather than announcing judgment. She learned the names of trees along the lane, the habits of birds nesting near the eaves, the comfort of anonymity earned through consistency. In this quieter sphere, she was no longer an object of speculation, but a woman allowed to occupy her days without defense, and the change reshaped her posture as surely as it reshaped her breath. He appeared gradually, never announced, as though conscious that trust required patience. The country gentleman possessed no title that preceded him, no household trained to anticipate his moods. His presence was defined instead by attentiveness, the way he listened without correcting, the way he offered opinions as invitations rather than conclusions. When he spoke to her, he met her eye with a steadiness that carried no challenge. She found herself answering honestly, surprised by the ease with which conversation unfolded absent strategy. Their meetings followed the logic of courtesy. Walks along hedgerows, shared readings by the fire, exchanges of thought shaped by mutual restraint. He never referred to her former engagement, yet his silence acknowledged it, granting her history without requiring its defense. In his company, she discovered a form of regard that neither diminished nor elevated her, but simply recognized her presence as sufficient. The realization unsettled her more than admiration ever had. One afternoon, as rain blurred the windows into silver threads, he returned a book she had lent him, its margins untouched out of respect. Inside lay a pressed wildflower, carefully preserved, its stem flattened but unbroken. The gesture carried no declaration, yet its restraint spoke volumes. She accepted it without comment, later placing it between the pages of her journal, where it joined words she had not yet dared to name. That evening, she slept without rehearsing explanations for the first time in months. Rumor, however, did not require invitation. It drifted from market stalls to parish pews, altering tone as it traveled. Some spoke of her improved spirits, others of possible attachment. None asked permission. When a letter reached London carrying these softened reports, it was read aloud, then folded with deliberation. In drawing rooms, the story shifted from rejection to curiosity. Sympathy thinned, replaced by speculation, and the Duke's name resurfaced with renewed interest. At Ashbourne, the Duke received the news alone. The paper trembled faintly between his fingers, betraying him to himself. She was content, it said. She had found ease beyond the orbit of his decisions. The information resisted dismissal. He reread the lines until their implications settled. Contentment, he realized, was what he had denied her, and the recognition unsettled his carefully constructed hierarchy of values. He ordered the fire stoked higher, as though warmth might clarify what ambition could not. Days grew restless. He attended meetings, approved accounts, received deference, yet felt increasingly detached from the authority these rituals affirmed. Memory intruded without permission, her composure in the ballroom, her voice thanking him for honesty. He began to question the narrative he had relied upon, the belief that control equaled strength. At night, the estate's silence pressed closer, its grandeur magnifying absence rather than purpose. He walked corridors once designed to impress, now echoing with thoughts he could not command into stillness. Meanwhile, her attachment deepened not through passion, but through accumulation. Small kindnesses formed a structure stronger than promise. He noticed when she tired, adjusted pace without remark, shared news without embellishment. In return, She offered trust cautiously, aware of its cost. When he finally spoke of the future, it was with humility rather than claim. He suggested, rather than assumed, a life shaped together, attentive to boundaries she alone could define. The possibility startled her with its gentleness. Acceptance did not arrive all at once. She weighed affection against memory, freedom against fear. Yet when she imagined refusal, she felt a tightening she could no longer ignore. The decision emerged quietly, crystallizing during an ordinary morning. She realized she wished to be known without armor. When she agreed to a tentative understanding, sealed only by words, the relief that followed felt earned, not bestowed. That night, she wrote to her family, her script steady, her tone certain. The confirmation reached the Duke as autumn settled across the land. Leaves turned, mirroring an internal shift he could no longer deny. She was engaged, the letter confirmed, her future redirected beyond recall. The word struck with unexpected force. He closed his eyes, acknowledging what pride had postponed. In choosing absence over vulnerability, he had mistaken permanence for safety. The knowledge arrived too late to prevent loss, yet too early to permit indifference. He summoned his secretary with an urgency that surprised them both, requesting details he had once dismissed as trivial: distances, introductions, the etiquette of unplanned visits. Each question revealed a crack in his former composure. He justified the interest as concern for propriety, yet beneath it stirred an unfamiliar hunger to be understood rather than obeyed. The estate staff sensed the change, exchanging glances as routine shifted subtly, as though the house itself anticipated movement. In the library, he paused before a map, tracing roads leading away from certainty, feeling the weight of choice press upon him with undeniable insistence. As dusk fell, he stood once more at the window, watching the grounds darken into abstraction. Somewhere beyond his reach, she had chosen a life defined by regard rather than rank. The hour felt suspended, as though the world itself waited to see whether he would remain a spectator to his own life or step beyond the boundaries he had defended so fiercely. The thought stirred resolve alongside regret. For the first time, he wondered whether duty might require pursuit rather than restraint, and whether silence, once his shield, had become his greatest adversary. That question followed him into the night, refusing every familiar answer. Alone, he traveled at dawn, when the countryside still held its breath and the roads belonged more to memory than movement. Mist rose from fields like unspoken doubt, blurring hedgerows and milestones alike, and the rhythm of hooves became a steady companion to thought. Each mile carried him farther from the authority that had once defined him and closer to a reckoning he could no longer postpone. He told himself the journey was necessary, proper, restrained, yet his pulse argued otherwise, quickening as familiar landmarks gave way to uncertainty. When he arrived, the house greeted him without ceremony. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth earned through presence rather than display. He dismounted alone, dismissing his escort with a brevity that surprised him. Inside, time slowed. The air smelled of wood and tea, of days shaped by attention. She stood near the window, light tracing her profile with a gentleness he had never granted her. For a moment, neither spoke, and the silence held more truth than speech ever had. She acknowledged him with composure, though surprise flickered beneath it. He bowed, not as a duke asserting rank, but as a man seeking audience. Words assembled carefully, stripped of ornament. He spoke of error without accusation, of pride without defense. He admitted the cost of his certainty, the hollowness that followed. Each sentence required effort, as though he were learning a new language whose grammar favored honesty over command. He did not ask forgiveness. He asked only to be heard. She listened without interruption, hands folded, gaze steady. When she answered, her voice carried neither bitterness nor hope. She spoke of survival, of the labor required to rebuild dignity once publicly undone. She described the quiet courage of choosing peace, the value of being seen without expectation. Her words revealed no invitation, yet they did not close the door entirely. In that restraint, he recognized a strength he had once mistaken for submission. He mentioned her impending marriage last, acknowledging it as fact rather than obstacle. The name of the other man did not pass his lips, yet respect did. He confessed that the knowledge of her happiness elsewhere had unsettled him more than loneliness ever had. The admission cost him dearly. He felt the weight of his former power fall away, leaving vulnerability exposed. In its place stood something fragile but unmistakably alive. She rose then, moving toward the hearth as if drawn by warmth. Firelight caught the curve of her face, revealing lines shaped by experience rather than age. She spoke of commitment as covenant, not convenience, and of promises chosen freely. Her affection, she explained, had grown from constancy, from gestures offered without demand. She did not accuse him of cruelty, only of absence. The distinction pierced deeper than blame. Outside, evening gathered, pressing shadows against the glass. He realized time was narrowing, that whatever remained unsaid would calcify into regret. He spoke again, this time without rehearsal. He admitted that duty had once been a refuge from feeling, that restraint had protected him from risk. He acknowledged that love, denied, had not vanished but sharpened. His voice faltered only once, when he confessed that he had never learned how to choose another's happiness over his own pride. Her response arrived slowly, measured as breath. She thanked him for truth finally offered, for recognizing what he had lost. Yet she did not release him from consequence. Choice, she reminded him, did not exist without cost. She had chosen stability, trust, a future not subject to withdrawal. To abandon that now would betray the very values his confession claimed to honor. Her loyalty, once given, would not be reclaimed by eloquence alone. He accepted the verdict without protest. The room seemed to contract, as though acknowledging finality. He straightened, dignity reassembled around loss rather than certainty. Before departing, he asked one final question, spoken softly, whether she had ever loved him. She met his gaze without hesitation. She said she had, deeply, and that was why she had survived his refusal. The truth struck him with a force he did not resist. He left as night claimed the fields, carrying no token, no promise. The road felt longer now, each step echoing with what might have been. Days followed in which he fulfilled every obligation with renewed precision, yet something essential had shifted. He no longer mistook admiration for connection, nor authority for belonging. Letters arrived announcing her marriage completed, her life settled into contentment earned through mutual regard. He read them once, then stored them carefully, neither displayed nor destroyed. Years later, his reputation remained intact, his influence undiminished. He became known for fairness, for listening where others commanded. Few understood the origin of this change. In quieter moments, he walked the same roads he had once taken toward confession, aware that return was neither possible nor desired. He had learned that love, when rejected, does not wait obediently for recall. It transforms, instructs, and departs, leaving behind a knowledge that alters every future choice. One evening, standing at his window as lamps flickered across distant villages, he felt the familiar ache surface, not as punishment, but as reminder. Somewhere beyond sight, a life continued without him, and in that truth lay both his loss and his becoming. He kept a single habit from that season of reckoning, returning often to the discipline of reflection he had once avoided. In counsel and solitude alike, he questioned motives before issuing decisions, measuring outcomes against unseen costs. This inward vigilance did not soften him entirely, yet it tempered ambition with awareness. Those closest sensed a depth beneath his reserve, a gravity earned through experience rather than inheritance. He never spoke her name aloud, honoring it through silence. Instead, he allowed the memory to instruct him daily, shaping mercy where severity once ruled, and patience where certainty had prevailed, accepting that some lessons arrive only after opportunity has passed forever. That knowledge became his quiet companion through every remaining season thereafter.